Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Apologize for the lack of content the last several days. COVID hit our house. I mentioned a couple of days ago in the video I did that we'd been sick. Well, it was COVID. My older son had it about a month ago, but the rest of us never got it. Well, the rest of us got it. And it started with my wife and my other two kids who we think picked it up at their drama camp, where my kids both had lead roles in their play that they were in, musical. And then they brought it home to me. And so I'm over COVID now, but still dealing with the results. I lost 7 pounds in the last 6 days. Heck of a diet plan. Still really, really tired. But still excited, 48 hours away from a flight to London. So we're all recovered enough for that trip, though we'll probably have to take it pretty slow when we first get there. But that's enough about that. I did want to make a video yesterday, but just didn't have the energy to do it. Yesterday was the anniversary of the Battle of the Little Bighorn, sometimes known as Custer's Last Stand, June 25th, 1876, the day that George Armstrong Custer and slightly less than 300 of his men were killed in a battle with Native Americans. So it's tough to find a good video that shows what's happening on a tactical level on YouTube about the events. And so I found one, and it doesn't really say a whole lot, but I'll try to fill in some gaps. And we're just going to use this as an opportunity to have a conversation about what happened that day, what went wrong for the 7th Cavalry and for Custer, what went right for the allied native tribes who were there fighting that day, and what was going on strategically. So first, a little background before we get into this. This is what is known as the Great Sioux War, the Sioux Indians, S-I-O-U-X, even though it wasn't just the Sioux. It was a number of different nations, including, I believe, the Arapaho, the Cheyenne were part of that, and Lakota, which were a tribe of Sioux Plains Indians. Use the term Indians, don't mean it to be disrespectful. That's just, that's how they were referred to. I'll try to use Native Americans when I remember to. But that's what's happening, and it's a complicated process that gets us to the point where this war happens. But the immediate effects are that there had been a treaty signed in which the Black Hills, which are the area that we're talking about here, were given by treaty and protected for these Native American tribes. Well, then some men who weren't supposed to be there found gold in the Black Hills. And of course, immediately people start pouring into the Black Hills looking for gold, and there become clashes with the Native Americans and the American government to its discredit. And as much as I love Ulysses S. Grant, he's one of my favorite historical figures of all time. He is partially to blame for this. He was president at the time. And basically the U.S. government goes back on the treaty and allows this to take place. And the Native Americans are saying, no, we were given this land, and they're going to fight for it. And so there is this large force of U.S. cavalry and other troops, some infantry as well, who are going to be sent in to deal with what are called the hostiles, which are the natives that refuse to be put on reservations. And basically, even if you weren't actively fighting against the U.S. government, if you did not obey the orders to go to a reservation, you were considered to be hostile. Men, women, children, didn't matter. So Custer is in command of one of these wings of this force that's supposed to move in from multiple sides and push the natives into the reservations or fight them if they're not willing to go. But Custer does what Custer does, which is he's not going to wait for everybody else. Custer was not even the commanding officer of the 7th Cavalry. He was the lieutenant colonel. He was second in command. I think Samuel Sturgis was the colonel in command of the regiment, but he was never actually in the field with the regiment. He commanded the 7th Cavalry for like almost 20 years, but wasn't in the field. So Custer was the field commander of the regiment. And Sturgis actually had a son who died at the Little Bighorn. And so Custer, background on him, He's a West Point grad. He's a Northeast Ohio native. Was born in a town called New Rumley, which is like an hour from where I live. He kind of considered Michigan home because I think as a teenager he'd gone to live there for a while with a sister or something. But then he came back here to Northeast Ohio, taught school for a while, goes to West Point. Ends up in command of Michigan Cavalry. He's originally a staff officer in the Civil War. He graduates right out of West Point. He gets a staff position. He's a low-ranking officer, but gets promoted all the way up to brigadier general and given a field command. And very brash, but very brave, and ends up a division commander by the end of the war. His younger brother, Tom, actually is the very first two-time recipient of the Medal of Honor. Gets both of them within a couple of days of each other in the last week of the war in Virginia. If you captured a flag, you got a Medal of Honor, and he captured 2 flags that week, so he got 2 Medals of Honor. So that's a little bit of the background. We'll talk about some of the other people involved as we get into this, but Custer is a brevet major general. Brevet was an honorary rank that was given, and like in other wars, your wartime rank is not what you revert to post-war. It happened in World War II, same thing. So Custer, post-war, gets reverted down to, he's a lieutenant colonel in the post-war army. So that's where we're at. So that's why sometimes you hear him called lieutenant colonel, sometimes you hear him called General Custer. Either would have been appropriate, but his operational rank was lieutenant colonel. So I don't know where we're going to pick up here. I want to see where we pick up, where this starts before we kind of talk about what's happening here at the beginning. All right, so it looks like we're actually picking up on on Sunday morning, or even Sunday. Yeah, I guess it is morning, afternoon. So what happens is Custer has been given the option to take Gatling guns along, kind of a primitive machine gun. But he feels like they'll slow him down. He was also given the option of taking some infantry with him. Again, thought that would slow him down. Figured he could handle this on his own. He's got about 600 men with him that he ends up dividing into multiple battalions. And, of course, that will be the first big mistake that he makes. If you ever want to see, there have been a lot of movies and TV shows that have done treatments of these events. But to me personally, I think the best I've seen is a TV series that was called Son of the Morning Star that stars Gary Cole. Yes, Lumbergh from, what's the name of that movie? The one with the pieces of flair, Jennifer Aniston and Ron Livingston and all those guys. Anyway, Office Space, Lumbergh. But he plays a fantastic Custer in this, and I think it's really well done. And it's told kind of back and forth between the native perspective and also the perspective of the men of the 7th Cavalry. I think it's really, really well done and a pretty balanced approach to what happened that day. Of course, the Native Americans refer to this as the Battle of the Greasy Grass because that was kind of one of the areas here is known as the Greasy Grass. It's called Battle of Little Bighorn because the Little Bighorn River runs through here. And, of course, because Custer and the men who were immediately with him were wiped out, the only real sources we have for what happened in the final moments of Custer's command come from the Native Americans who were attacking. And there's no reason for us to doubt those sources, but you always have to doubt one side of a story, no matter which side that is. It's always good to try and get both. Can't get that in this case. We also have a lot of recent archaeology that has helped a lot with understanding this. So Custer is awoken. He's told that they've spotted a huge Native American village, and they're up on a hillside, and it's like, 10, 20 miles away. And he's got scouts with him, Indian scouts. These are from other tribes that are hostile toward these tribes. And so the enemy of my enemy is my friend, that kind of thing. And so they see it, but Custer can't see the village. He keeps telling them, I can't see it. And they're like, well, it's there. It's definitely there. And the mistake that Custer makes is in underestimating the size of this village. A lot of the natives will later say it was the largest collection of Native Americans in one village at one time there had ever been. And if it had been another day or two later, it would have moved on or it would have broken up and it wouldn't have been like this. So this is kind of a perfect storm of time and place where this happens. So you can see here, Benteen departs on his scout to the left because part of this is they don't know what's going on. They don't know that there's this huge Native American village here. They know there's a village somewhere. And so he sends Benteen down this way. You got to remember all of these guys, not just Custer, but Reno and Benteen, who are his second and third in command. These are all guys who had higher ranks during the Civil War. Reno and Benteen, I think, both commanded brigades during the Civil War. I know Reno did. Benteen may have also, but they were both brevet brigadier generals during the American Civil War, so they also get bumped back down. And Reno kinda, but Benteen especially did not care for Custer, did not like the way he did things, and there's going to be a lot of question afterwards about how much did they really try to help him when the time came. So Benteen is sent this way. And so he's going to end up being way off and basically out of the fight completely for most of this day. The pack train, they've selected a few men, I think, from each company or troop. Sometimes companies are called troops, to guard the pack train, which has all the additional ammunition, all their extra food, all their supplies. The other two groups of men are going to be then commanded by Custer and Reno. So this is where they break off, and Custer is going to go up to the top of a hill where he's going to look down and see Reno attack the village from the south. And so Reno is going to spread out real wide his formation, and they're going to charge, and then they're going to dismount and form a skirmish line and fight as skirmishers after they cross the river here. And so you can see at this point, it's already been like an hour since Benteen has split off. So Benteen finds out there's nothing down here, so now he's going to go back, rejoin the packs, and then come up and see what further instructions are going to come for him. So there's where Reno is going to deploy his skirmish lines. So his men are dismounted, and now they're fighting. And now here's some things you need to keep in mind. These cavalry men had single-shot breech-loading weapons. So breech-loading meaning they're not muzzle-loading. You don't load them from the end of the gun. You load them from right here. So, you're opening it up. You're putting the single shot in. You're closing it. Now, these single-shot breech-loading weapons are fantastic at range and when you have superiority. Because they've got twice the range that the single-shot guns tend to have. They're much more accurate. But there's two problems with them. Number one, of course, is how fast you can fire, which is part of why they have them, because they don't want them running out of ammunition, because they can only carry so much with them when they're sometimes hundreds of miles away from home base. But these particular weapons also tended to jam when they were fired a lot. And that's going to happen a lot with these guys, is they're going to find that these weapons are jamming on them. The Native Americans, on the other hand, a lot of them actually have repeating rifles, Henrys, Spencers, things like that. Some of them are fighting with revolvers. Some of them are fighting with bows and arrows. It's just really whatever they have. But the estimate is there were at least 200 of these natives who had repeating rifles, which, again, they're outranged by the cavalry, but once you get in close, once you close that range, now the repeaters are great because you're getting off 5, 6, 7 shots for every one that the cavalry is able to get off. So Custer is up here at a place that'll later be called Reno Hill, and you'll see why in a little bit. But he's able to see Reno's attack. So he sees what's happening, but he doesn't see how it ends up. He sees Reno's engaged. Once Reno's engaged, now Custer's plan is to go up and hit the village from the other side so they can contain them and keep them from running and getting away. But what he doesn't know is how big the village is. And so he misses out on what happens next with Reno. So now we're about 2 hours into when Benteen had split off. Custer doesn't wait to see what happened. He assumes the attack is good, but this is the point at which Reno starts to get overwhelmed because there are just massive amounts of Native American warriors that are pouring out into this. There's estimates that this village was as high as 10,000 people. Remember, Custer's got 600 men with him. Most of the estimates I've read are somewhere around 2,000 Native American actual fighting men. So Custer, even with all of his men, is outnumbered 3-1. But now you take away the men guarding the pack train, you take away the men who are with Benteen, and now you're dealing with maybe 400 between Custer and Reno. And so now you're outnumbered about 5-1. So Reno pulls back to the timber. He's got a scout with him. I think his name was Bloody Knife, but I can't remember. I might be confusing him with one of the other scouts. The scout gets hit in the head, and his brains get like shot all over Reno, and Reno panics. And he starts ordering mount, dismount, mount. Like he starts giving these conflicting orders right off the bat. And a lot of people who are there, who are witnesses, say at that moment that Reno just kind of panicked and basically orders every man for himself. I may be getting ahead of myself. That may not have happened yet here. But Custer doesn't know this is going on. He thinks Reno's still fighting. So you've already got 35 that have been killed. And now he's pulling back. And see, if Custer had waited a couple more minutes, at this point, Custer and Reno would be reunited. They're still over here. So this is one of those moments in the battle where, Custer is committing and has no idea what's just happened with Reno. And Reno is heading back towards, and you've got Benteen coming up. And if Custer had been able to come back and they had all been able to fortify up on Reno Hill, might be a different outcome. And Reno Hill is a really high, prominent defensive position. And now you're going to see Miles Keogh here. Miles Keogh is one of those just really fascinating figures. In fact, let me show you something with him here, because here's Miles Keogh right here on the left. He's a member of the staff of General John Buford during the American Civil War. Keogh was born in Ireland. Very well-liked, very popular soldier. He was a colonel himself during the Civil War. Was with John Buford when he died, accompanied his body to West Point where he was buried. Just was like family to Buford. And so you can see them here in that picture. And Keogh is one of the highest ranking officers who's with Custer. In fact, I think of the men who are with Custer directly, he's probably the next highest ranking officer. Custer's also got two of his brothers with him. Thomas, the one I mentioned earlier, and also his brother Boston, who is a civilian contractor with the government. He's got a brother-in-law who's with him. I think at least one or two nephews who are with him. There's a civilian reporter who's going to be killed with Custer. And Keogh's going to have kind of a last stand of his own before Custer is even surrounded. And so this is another one of those mistakes, right? Custer's already multiple times divided his force in the face of what he doesn't know is a much superior enemy force. So he's divided once, he's divided twice, now he's dividing again. And he's got less than 300 men with him as it is. So Benteen's going to connect with Reno now. Now, Custer's pursuing non-combatants, and there's actually a bit of a strategy here with that. And some think the strategy was that if you can grab a bunch of women and children, then you can keep the warriors from annihilating you. So it was almost like a survival strategy, was to try and go after the non-combatants. If you realize you can't take on the warriors. We don't know for sure, though. Again, this is all speculation based on what we think happened. So now Keogh and three companies are going to stand, and they're going to basically be wiped out. So Captain Weir now is just desperate to go and help Custer, because they can hear the gunfire. They can see the smoke over in the valley from up here. and I don't know if they've showed this yet or if it happened, but at some point before Custer rode into this last fight, he sends John Martin. I think his name was actually Giovanni Martini. He was Italian, but he went by John Martin. He sends him with a message back to Benteen before he goes kind of north to fight the natives. And it says, big village, please hurry, bring packs. P.S. Bring packs. So John Martin arrives with this message, and we actually still have this copy. It was written by, I think, W.W. Cook, who was a relative of Custer's, who was his adjutant. And then this is one of those debated moments in the battle, because Benteen's going to get this message, and he's going to say, well, wait a second. How does he expect me to hurry to him if he wants me to bring the packs? Because the pack train was like a mile behind him, and it was much slower. Because they're on mules, they're carrying a lot of equipment and supplies. So Benteen says, I can't do both. I can't hurry to him and bring the packs. So if I'm going to be of any use to him, I had better wait for the packs. And it's one of those fateful decisions where, could the battle have gone differently if they had just gone to Custer's aid, or would they have also been destroyed? We really don't know for sure. So Reno will say that he gives Weir instructions to try and contact Custer, and there'll be some debate about that later, that Weir tried to go to his aid and he was actually told no. And in fact, there's a scene, and I don't know how true to history it is, but there's a scene in Son of the Morning Star where you'll have Captain Weir come up to Reno once they've all gotten together up here on Reno Hill. And he comes up and he says, I expect immediate orders to go to the sound of the guns, to go to Colonel Custer's aid. And Reno just doesn't even say anything. He just kind of looks at him. So then Weir looks at Benteen and he says, Captain Benteen, permission to go to the sound of the firing, sir. And he says, permission denied. He said, this is a groundhog case. Dig rifle pits. It's every man for himself. And they're basically switching over into self-preservation mode. They're like, listen, Custer has made his decision. He's on his own. We're digging in and making sure that we don't get wiped out too. And that's kind of the attitude that they take. And they may not have been wrong about that. They may, if they had tried to go to Custer's aid, have ended up with the same fate. Or they might have been able to break through and save him. We just don't know. And there's a lot of debate too about whether or not there was this kind of traditional last stand where Custer and his remaining men are digging in and they're surrounded and they're all up on that hill the way that you see. Because if you go there today, and it's really high on my bucket list of places here in the States to go to, is the Little Bighorn Battlefield. I've been to Montana, but not that part. It's a beautiful state. But it's one of the only battlefields on Earth that I'm aware of where they actually have markers that show where men died rather than where they were buried. And a lot of them were buried in the spots where they died initially. But we know that at least in some of those cases, they're wrong. And there's been a lot of evidence and archaeology that has been done to determine that. So you see on Last Stand Hill this kind of circle of these last guys, but it was really more of a kind of a running battle rather than a go up to one spot, get surrounded and wiped out kind of thing. So at this point, Keogh's men are wiped out. So they dig in and they actually start shooting their own horses. Now you have to think about this. They are hundreds of miles away from civilization. They are days away by horse from their base, and they're at least probably a day or two away from, I think like a day away from the rest of the men that are supposed to be coming. I think it's General Alfred Terry's column who will arrive the next day. And they're shooting their horses. this is their lifeline if you're a cavalryman. So you know how desperate the situation is if you're shooting the horses to get cover behind them. And what the natives are doing is they actually come in, they get really close, and they're using blankets, and they start waving the blankets. They start scaring the horses away. So they call E Company the Gray Horse Troop because they all had these gray horses. And so even from miles away, you could identify E Company because they all had that particular type of horse. Yeah, so they do attempt to kind of move in that direction, but they never really see what happened. And in fact, it'll be at least a day or two later before they even know what happened to Custer. And then the natives kind of turn on them, and they will actually come and encircle them up on Reno Hill. And there will be like a dozen or more medals of honor that are given out for men in Reno's command that survives. A lot of them for men who risk their lives going to get water. And it's really similar to like the Battle of Rorke's Drift, where you have just a ridiculously high number of Victoria Crosses given out. I think there's something to be said. I'm not saying these men weren't brave, but I think when you have a situation like this where PR-wise it looks really bad because a bunch of your men got wiped out. Same thing, Rorke's Drift happens at the same time as the Battle of Isandlwana, where a huge force of British soldiers are wiped out. So you want to make something good out of it, and so you find a bunch of heroes that you can honor in the midst of this really terrible thing. And so while this was a great victory for the Native Americans, it's kind of their high water mark, so to speak, because things just all go downhill from here for them. But this is definitely a battle I plan on covering in a multi-part series when I get a chance to go to that battlefield, because there's so much history here. I want to give the history of the Native American tribes that were involved, the Cheyenne, the Lakota, the Arapaho, some of the characters, some of the figures on that side. Go in depth more with some of the men who were in Custer's command. It's such a fascinating time in history, and it's such an interesting thing to learn more about. So add to the conversation, use the comment section below. But I just thought it would be fun to talk about this because it was the anniversary. Thanks for watching.